think all I have to do is that, yeah. So, in the not too distant future, anthropologists, or even the distant future, anthropologists will look back at our time and we will be characterized by the emergence of the most expensive human artifact ever created, which is the internet, the web. And the most important fact is that the reason it's become such an important and critical part of our world today is that it's social, which was not what most people expected. Most people thought it would be a way to soup up, supply chains. There'd be some kind of e-commerce. Basically, people viewed it and said, this interesting internet is going to take off and speed up the things we're already doing. But as usual, the introduction of new media leads to people doing things that they couldn't do before. And what we found out is we've invented a web where all the roads lead back to us. We invented the web, apparently, to happen to ourselves. And that's what's changing the world. Now, when it first started, that was not what really people thought was going on. The rise of social media, we didn't call it social media at the beginning. How many people were blogging in 1999? Okay, there's a few of us. Wow. It was a small group, and we were talking about personal publishing. We were trying to take the established model of publishing that big publishers had, and we were able to do it on the web because it was cheap. We called that democratization, but it wasn't really making anything democratic. It was just cheap, meaning we could now afford to do it, and relatively quickly, those who were doing it started to read each other. Later on, we invented the social stuff, comments, trackbacks, a whole long list of things that were afterthoughts, were spontaneously cropped up by the people that were messing around with it. There was no great plan. We sort of fell into it. And actually, democratization of media is also a bad term because the web, even the very social web that we live in every day, is not particularly democratic. Not in the sense that everyone has an equal voice. It's a very unequal voice. In fact, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on today because now I'm at the end of the day and I've been told that time is short. And it's like traveling at the end of the day. The airlines are always later if you're trying to catch that 5 o'clock flight. So I've been told I have less time, so I can't spend as much time on this. So what has really happened actually is something more like retribalization of media. We've taken back the open social discourse that media was supposed to provide and did a really terrible job of. And we've reverted to this almost instinctive model, almost a like human innate capacity for dealing with things on a tribal level. And tribalism is not very democratic. And so as a result, what we're doing is, as people have characterized the power laws and so on, it's extremely unequal, and people who are very influential have a significantly larger voice than other people on the web. But nonetheless, don't get me wrong, it's still extremely social, and it is still extremely disruptive to the established organizations. And this is all old news. The interesting thing, though, is just because our tribe, the English-speaking tribe on the web, has a leaning towards being democratic, you shouldn't think that that's some kind of universal and it's innate in human minds and it's going to crop up everywhere, that social technologies start being applied. So what really has happened is we've taken something like gossip, which is what goes on in social networks between people, small talk, and we've used that to tear down or defect collectively away from established media outlets. And this is hugely disruptive, and it's continuing to be disruptive, and that's because, in a sense, small talk is big again. The nature of the internet and the nature of the social tools we've built now, the rise of ubiquitous connectivity, now mobile devices, smart mobile devices, means that us nattering amongst ourselves can become the most important connections that we have in the world, and ultimately the way we define ourselves. And that disintermediation of media has, as we all know, enormous impacts on the established business model. And since this has been treated at great length today, I'm going to skip over it and say this is a well-plowed territory. I want to focus on what happens to us as individuals now that we're living in this social web today. We've defected from mass media effectively. One of the last presenters showed that, millennials, I guess it is, have completely defected from watching local television news. Completely. I mean, they just don't watch it at all. And as a result of that, what does that mean about our sense of self? We are no longer having our self defined, in part or completely by mass institutions. So we've demassified our identity. People actually, I get in a lot of arguments when I talk to, whoops, I didn't mean to do that. Get in a lot of arguments when I talk to people about the legitimacy of having a fragmented identity because of the nature of how we can connect on the web now. It's possible to belong to many disparate groups, different social scenes within different social tools, and from that have actually potentially even conflicts within yourself about what your positions are, views of the world are, what is right and what is wrong. And it's very contextualized. I actually had a conversation with a woman in Paris after a conference, and she got so angry that she was yelling at me, telling me specifically that such a viewpoint was a sign of accepting immaturity, and that there was something morally questionable about me even advocating it as a possibility, let alone suggesting that I myself was changing in that way as well. She actually left the table and went to another table because she was so upset with me. And this is something I've seen over and over again. You see it a lot in the Sunday supplements that basically say that what we're doing, the kinds of things that we're doing, the kinds of reaction we have to the world on the web is somehow illegitimate or immoral. So we have on there, which is a little more palatable. It's more palatable to say we're increasingly having a life where our sense of self is being defined by the connections we have with other people, by who we follow and who follows us, rather than by ethnic background, geographic location, your personal history of where you've worked, and so on. But it's still very, very tribal. So instead we seem to be, I try to characterize this, instead of leading a life, because we're becoming so social, it's more like we're following a life. It's defined by who we follow and who is following us. And this leads into a potentially very long conversation about the rise of a public identity and what I call publicy, that is openly living a life on the web and potentially having that in a fragmented sense. But that is like a 45-minute presentation all by itself. And I've got only 7 minutes left. Or how many minutes do I have left, actually? 5. Oh my God. So I will jump ahead here. Whoops. What happened? I lost my presentation. That's bad. What happened? Goodness. Huh. Let me see. There it is. I tried to do the clever thing to download the app so I wouldn't have to worry about. There it is. I must have just. Fine. So, social thought. Social tools, because of the plasticity of the human mind, actually change our minds. That is, we are changed. Our minds are shaped by the tools that we use. Now, probably everyone here realizes that human beings are naturally literate. That is, you can learn to speak any language that you're exposed to at a certain age in your life, but human beings aren't numerate. If you expose people to this culture that we live in, even though it's full of numbers, those kids will never learn to add and subtract. They have to be trained. It takes an entire culture to bang calculus into the head of human beings, and it takes 20 years or however long it takes. And it turns out that all of these things that we don't have in us innately have to be acquired in our minds by using natural cognitive centers that we have that were designed for something else. So it seems that numeracy is probably using the centers in the brain that are related to reading, music, and a couple of other things. We know that if you expose, for example, old people to flight simulator software, their ability to drive an automobile increases dramatically. It's really very, very measurable. And it lasts for a very long time, even if they're only exposed to this flight simulator software for a few hours. I mean, it's really noticeable. So what all this says is that we have a very plastic brain. We're not fixed in our skill sets. We can all learn new things, even at a relatively advanced stage. And apparently, one of the things that we're learning better by exposing ourselves to social tools is multitasking. All right, there are some myths going around about multitasking. One is that we don't have the ability to do it. But there's been some new research that clearly demonstrates that there are what they call supertaskers. There are people who can do extremely complicated tests, like doing math over the telephone while driving a car, where their scores at both activities remain the same even if they're doing them both at the same time. So these people are probably out here 3 sigma on a bell curve of the natural ability to do multitasking. And like most skills that human beings have in some level, it can be acquired. But it appears that acquiring the skill to multitask might be like other kinds of human mastery. It might require 10,000 hours, which is roughly the time it takes to become a concert pianist or get a black belt in karate. So we will have to wait 10 years to see what the next crop of children are capable of doing who have been exposed to modern social tools. And 7 or 8 years from now, we'll find out what human beings are capable of. In the meantime, we're going to continue to see the controversy about whether or not people are capable of living effectively while being connected in these social tools. Oh, did I lose my thing again? Why does it keep doing that? Oh, and nobody told me. My friends. I wonder why it does that. Maybe I'm pressing the wrong buttons. Oh, here we go. So, I'll just make one note about this. One of the big changes that's coming is we're moving from a world of apps that are dominating the world of social now on the web. Facebook, Twitter, divided, silos, no intercommunication between them, necessarily or intentionally by the owners of these things, dividing our activities in little parcels. But the rise of the social operating system, where the functionality of core basic capabilities that we rely on for sociality, like following people, reposting what people say, for example, this is going to be built into the new crop of operating systems. I expect to see parts of that. We already have hints of parts of it coming out in iOS's release this summer, the Lion release of Mac. And there have been other interesting things that people are doing in Linux variants and so on. And this particular thing is going to demonstrate that Facebook and other apps are going to be rapidly eclipsed. I mean, I've written that Facebook is the new AOL, that they are likely to have the same, do you remember when AOL bought Time Warner, when it was worth ridiculous billions of dollars, and then immediately after that, people started to defect from AOL and stopped paying the money for their 300 baud modem connections. The same thing will happen when these OSs roll out and we start to expect the ability to connect with people and socialize with people to be the primary thing that the operating systems are doing, because we're not really using these computers to do computing, are we? We're mostly connecting with people. This is all rolling out at exactly the same time as the adoption of these social tools in the workplace. These kinds of technologies have been, in a sense, proven in the social context on the open web. And did I do it again? So when I click on this, it goes away. That's weird. Okay, I won't do it this way anymore. I've usually done this by running this. This is SlideRocket. I run it on a browser window, and it doesn't do this thing. But obviously, when I do it here, it does. So the metaphor of a business as a machine, which is primarily the way we thought about it is over the last couple of hundred years in the rise of industrialism, is now going to be degraded by the real fundamental shift in our viewpoint of what it is we're up to. It'll be switching to a notion of businesses as being networks, or even better, thinking about businesses as being more like a city than an army. Cities are a very interesting thing. Cities are unlike anything else in the universe except for living things. That is, they have super linear productivity. As more people move to the city, New York, for example, the productivity of the city as a whole, the amount of innovation going on, the amount of great food, the amount of good theater increases per capita. It doesn't decrease. But businesses all have the capacity, the opposite. That is, they're sublinear. As you add more people to a business, the performance per person decreases. This is a sort of a necessary aspect, perhaps, of how we're thinking about business and how it's being managed. It's my hope and my belief that the only path through for businesses to become more effective and more high performance is to become more like cities, that is, to become more unplanned, more distributed. They will be more open. A great example of this is recently I've had this anecdote I've shared. Someday in the future, businesses, you won't apply to go work for them. You'll just move there, like moving to a city and start working. And that was kind of a thought experiment that I talked about. And then last week I saw that the CEO of Color, the new photo sharing app, did anyone use this? It was a big stir. They raised $41 million. It's really an interesting app, but more interestingly enough relative to my talk, is that the CEO posted a note on the door of their front door, their office in San Francisco, saying, we would like anybody who wants to work with us on product direction to just come in and start working with us. So he wanted to collect good ideas, but also the implication is if we find somebody that has really great ideas, maybe you'd be working here full time. So here's a guy who's actually taken my thought experiment and has extended it way beyond that. So I think we'll see companies that are adopting more of this. There'll be more porous boundaries with the outside world. They'll have an internal marketplace for ideas and talent. Senior management will operate more like Hollywood producers rather than directly having people, quote unquote, report to them. They'll invest company money in projects. And greater levels of personal autonomy, self-organization of groups and projects. We're seeing this in a very distributed way. It's kind of like Gibson said, the future's here, but it's unequally distributed. Some companies are doing this now already, in part, but no companies that I know of are doing all of this at once.
So it disappeared again.
Pardon me? Oh, it disappeared again. That's because anytime I touch this other app,
It's giving you a hint.
yeah, it's giving me a hint. It's time to close up. Hold on, let me just put the last thing on. Hello? Wow, so odd. So, I believe that what will happen with business first will reach into all other sectors. We'll see our institutions everywhere changed in a similar way. One great example is the rise of an alternative food network, the rise of what is some people calling food tech, where I believe that the use of these tools in that network will create an alternative, social network-based approach so that people that are really interested in keeping up with the, provenance of where the food goes from, as they say, from the dirt to your mouth, will be able to keep track of what's going on in the food, connect directly to farmers and distributors and artisanal food production, and have the same kind of impact on the agribusiness market that social media today has had on the established media market. And the example we heard earlier about, what was it called, the healthcare, Clear health costs. Same sort of thing, a possible way of changing the economics of that market. So we've seen the Arab Spring, we know all about that, what's going on there, the rise of a polarized context where people have taken that, the social media and used it as an active part of a revolution across multiple countries. I think we're going to see the same kind of revolutions happening on a small basis across, first in business and then all of our established institutions, political systems and the like.
So I think that's probably a good place to leave it.